Hello everyone and welcome to the first of the event of the Hub Live, RouteZero, COP26 and the race to zero emission vehicles. My name is Sandra Rowling, I'm Head of Transport at the Climate Group and I'm delighted to be part of this event with you today. We'll be exploring the latest innovations in technology, finance and policy that are driving the shift to zero emission vehicles, and we will discuss why ensuring a just transition for clean transport is absolutely key. The science is clear. We have to halve global emissions by 2030, and road transport is responsible for a significant proportion of that, close to a fifth of greenhouse gas emissions, in fact. So there's a lot of work to do. But thankfully, despite the uncertainty of the past year and a half, the transition to zero-emission vehicles is underway, and it's not a question of if it will happen anymore, but how fast we can do it. In just 4 years, our EV100 initiative has grown to include over 100 multinational companies committed to switching more than 5 million electric vehicles by the end of the decade. We're also seeing promising signs of movement from policymakers and from industry, with increasing numbers of governments and automotive manufacturers announcing commitments to the all-electric future. So this is a pivotal year for the climate and a pivotal year for zero-emission vehicles as a major solution. With clean road transport set as one of the key campaign themes for COP26, we've been determined to use this opportunity to build momentum and deliver impact ahead of the negotiations. Earlier this year, we launched RouteZero, a COP26 ambition platform for zero-emission vehicles run by the Climate Group and the Climate Champions, along with 15 partners from around the world. And we've been engaging businesses, cities, states, regions, investors and individuals to send a clear signal that the race to zero-emission vehicles is on and we can go even faster. And the discussion today will showcase some of that exciting work. So before I hand over to Helen Clarkson, the CEO of the Climate Group, who will be leading our first session on zero-emission freight, let me invite you all to join us to make 2021 the end of the internal combustion engine.
Hello and welcome to the first session of our RouteZero event, How to Keep on Trucking New Opportunities in Zero Emission Freight. And I'm delighted to be facilitating a conversation today between Christian Levin, CEO of Scania, one of the world's leading manufacturers of commercial vehicles, and Kees van der Berg, Director General of Mobility at the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management for the government of the Netherlands. Trucks currently account for only 2% of vehicles on the road, but they're responsible for 22% of road transport CO2 emissions in the EU. And so that's why today we're talking about the opportunities for decarbonising medium and heavy duty vehicles, the innovations in technology and the role of ambitious policy signals to accelerate the market. So Christian, let's start with you. The ambition on zero emission freight has really moved so quickly in the last couple of years. Why has that happened? How have things changed? Why are we seeing this change?
Yeah, Helen, you're absolutely right. I think we see change at the speed that we never thought was possible. And that's really great. And there are many forces coming into play. It is, of course, the climate issue that is pushing all of us, but we see other mega trends in society, such as, for instance, urbanization and digitalization that is changing the name of the game. But the need for transport will not change. I think it's even like so that it will increase. But what needs to happen is that we need to decarbonize it, and we need to decarbonize it quickly. Luckily, there's a lot happening on the technology side, so which we can take advantage of. Connected vehicles, in our case, then coming out of digitalization, and then of course electrification journey that is happening now at a very good speed. So I think that we are ready to take on at Scania at least, and we are also the first and until very recently the only heavy vehicle manufacturer that was approved for the science-based climate targets. So we have a very consistent plan based on these new technologies that is taking us towards a zero carbon footprint according to the Paris Agreement. And I'm happy to say now, we're talking about the Netherlands here with Kees, that we start to see the first early adopters who take on these types of vehicles. And we're actually serial producing now battery electric vehicles. And we have quite good number of early adopters coming out of the Netherlands who wants to try these technologies, who believe in them, and who of course then spread the word. And this is exactly what we need. But we're really at the beginning of the curve, and now we need to accelerate.
Yeah, and at the end of last year, the Netherlands, and you started to talk about this, Netherlands and CalSTART announced the development of a global memorandum of understanding, so calling on leading nations to really speed up manufacture and adoption of zero-emission medium and heavy-duty vehicles. Kees, can you tell us a bit about that, what you're trying to achieve with the global MOU?
Thank you, Helen. I'll be glad to do so. First of all, thank you for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here. To be accompanied by Christian Levin and the CEO of Scania, and I welcome your leadership, Christian. It's much needed. We need to align the ambitions of the transport sector with the ambition of the Paris Agreement to be climate neutral by 2050. But yet the emissions of road transport are still on the rise, so we have to remediate. And then speaking about the MOU, we've launched this global MOU to align leading nations along emissions targets. With that, we send, I hope, a strong signal to the market to drive innovation and vehicle production. We, as the Netherlands, want to achieve net zero in 2050 with a fleet turnover of about 10 years. We need 240 goals for 100% new trucks being zero emission. And to get on track to that, we need a target of about 30%, I think, new trucks being zero emission by 2030. And the global MOU you spoke about will be signed as part of the COP26. And I invite all countries to sign up the MOU and join an ever-growing group. I'm happy to invite non-state actors also to endorse this global MOU. And this joint resolve sends a strong signal to the market nations that nations are ready and are willing for a zero-emission ride.
Great, and I think these long-term goals are really critical. But we're also at Climate Week this year talking about what needs to happen now. And if we look at today, where are the biggest gaps? Is it the policy? Is it the vehicles? Is it the infrastructure? Christian, let's start with you on that.
Yeah, no, I'd be glad to. I just wanted to say that we're also fully committed, of course, to the MOU that Kees was talking about from the Scania side. Yeah, what is it? I would stick out my chin and say it's not the vehicle. I mean, we've heard so many times now that this is a hen or the egg discussion. Not anymore. We have the vehicles, and so does our competitors, by the way. Of course, we are starting up now with the first models, but when we are approaching 2023-24, you will see a full range of battery electric vehicles that will be available in all sorts of specifications. And then, of course, the rest of the system needs to follow. So talking to customers already today, why are you not jumping on the train? Is it that you're afraid of the quality of the vehicle or the reliability? What is it? And it's only one thing. It is charging. So we need to start to invest heavily into a charging infrastructure, and there we have decided, actually together with competitors, to also do our part. So we're going to invest in 1,700 charging stations throughout Europe. But of course, we need the help here from policymakers so that this can happen really, really fast. And then, of course, the second part is we need to fill these charging stations with green energy. So we need to see a quick transition also in the energy system for the whole thing to actually make sense. So, I mean, let's push together towards that future. Technologically, financially, we are ready to do it, but we need to pull it through together.
What about you? Where do you think the biggest gaps are today?
Well, I think, of course, I agree with Christian. I think we need, that's what he says, to work on all three of them. And it's the interaction between those three that makes make some speed. And I think that's crucial by doing it together. And you see that on all the dimensions, on policy, on production, and on infrastructure. Well, there is momentum now, and it's growing momentum. We have to step forward. Policymakers first worldwide are working on ambitious regulations and incentives to implement policy targets for zero emission vehicles. In the Netherlands, for example, we work on zero emission zones. About 40 of our main municipalities to create such zero emission zones. So I think that's very important. And besides that, we see every day announcements of zero emission trucks that are even cheaper, lighter, safer, and have a longer range. So also this is a very important thing. Excellent example is the announcement that you, Christian, just made. I find it incredible that Scania is now testing an all-electric truck on a track for 1,600 kilometers. So yes, technology is ready. So policy and technology, and of course, in the third place, adequate infrastructure is very important. It's crucial. Without this, nothing moves literally. And we in the Netherlands are a front runner on charging infrastructure. Our national charging infrastructure plan is very, very important, but we also need to improve the infrastructure on the European level, especially for transport. So I think we need to work on all three of them.
Great, thank you. And thank you both so much. And it's really good to hear, as I say, we know we need all of these things, but hearing so much energy and progress from both of you is really inspiring. And this was, as we said at the beginning, a sector that really not long ago was sort of in that hard to abate category, and sort of we'll get to that at some point. And actually we're hearing from both of you that we're getting very close to this tipping point on technology. The technology's there, policymakers are behind it. So thank you both so much for all your work and for joining us, Christian and Kees, today. And I'm now going to hand over to Sandra, who will be introducing our next session.
Thanks, Helen. So collaboration is absolutely key, obviously, to unlocking the shift to zero-emission freight. So it's been really great to see the leading manufacturer and the leading government discuss together how we can achieve this together. So on to our next session. I'd now like to introduce Monica Araya, who will be moderating our first panel, which will focus on the innovations in finance, technology, and policy that are helping to drive a faster shift to zero-emission vehicles. Over to you, Monica.
Thank you, Sandra. And welcome everybody to this panel. We're going to be discussing the acceleration of zero-emission vehicles. We're going to hear about finance, technology, and policy. My name is Monica Araya. I am working as part of Drive Electric, Distinguished Fellow at ClimateWorks, and I'm also a special advisor to the high-level champion for COP26, Nigel Topping. I am delighted to welcome our panelists, Bjorn Anwolf, Chief Financial Officer at Volvo Cars, Pia Heidenmark-Cook, Chief Sustainability Officer at Inca Group, we know that as IKEA, many of us, Benoit Chadet, Minister for the Environment and the Fight Against Climate Change at the Government of Quebec, and Mariam Omi, Head of Sustainability and Responsible Investment Strategy at Legal and General Investment Management. So welcome everybody. And because we're going to make the most of the time, I am going to jump straight into questions. And we have met before, and we have agreed that instead of starting with the traditional opening remarks, we're going to have questions, very straightforward questions, and we're going to get started with Bjorn. So Bjorn, we know that the industry, the automotive industry, is a big part of the problem when it comes to climate change and air pollution, I might add. And yet we know that there is a big opportunity for manufacturers to be part of the solution. And Volvo has a story, a very powerful story to tell. So what do you want to tell us about the role of the industry in this transition?
I think first of all, as you said, we need to get the world to net zero emission by 2050. That's pretty clear. And the automotive industry is clearly key part of making that happen. First of all, today 20% of the greenhouse emissions is coming from road transportation. So clearly we're a big part of the problem today. And also the automotive industry has traditionally been a sector which is really at the core of the ecosystem of the industrial sector. So changes in the automotive industry has ripple effect into other industries, steel industry, aluminium, plastic. So bad decisions in the automotive industry will have bad ripple effect. So I think stakes are high, and the automotive industry has a big responsibility to act here and to really create a bit of a catalytic effect. And that's really what we're trying to do at Volvo Cars. We have a strategy to be the fastest transformer and to take on a catalytic role. And what we have said that we should fully electrify our company to start with by the end of this decade. But we're also clear that making long-term pledges is not what the industry should be about. It should be about making actions here and now. So we're focusing very much about what we can do here and now in terms of how we invest into the right future, how we spin off our internal combustion engines, and how we really drive into much more decarbonized value chain. We aim to be carbon neutral by 2040, which is great. But I think the general great news that I think I want to leave you with is that we at Volvo are not doing this only because we're human-centric and good-hearted people. We're actually doing this because it's great business. I mean, consumers always expected for Volvo to lead the race to zero death in road traffic. Now they expect the same in leading the race to zero emissions. So all of a sudden, it's very, very clear that it's going to be good business to do this. We are not debating any longer if it's a good business case for airbags or auto brakes. That's obvious. And I think the debate for whether it's profitable to decarbonize the value chain, that debate is soon over, I believe. Being on the right side of progress is always right. And now, I mean, regulators, consumers, investors, they all want the same thing, and the technology enables it. So I think we have a fantastic opportunity now to decarbonize the value chain in automotive very quickly. And I believe it's going to have a positive ripple effect on the broader industry. So the tides have changed. The business case is starting to be there. So clean business is good business.
Great. And I think that is something we're reading, right? It is not about whether to do this, but how fast. And your mentioning of opportunity is very important, because that's also part of the change in how we tell the story to the public. And now let me move to Pia, because Pia, you come from a company that has very ambitious targets, and we know that collaboration is important. Collaboration among companies, between the companies and the government, sometimes with even civil society. Is there an example that you would like to share about the power of collaboration?
Absolutely. I think when you set ambitious goals, and we've committed to only having zero emissions, which is mainly electric at this point, but also some other fuels by 2025, so only in 4 years, then you can't do that by working alone. And actually, in general, there's very few things you can do by acting alone. So you need to work together, just like you said, and also like Björn said, between investors, startups, innovators, academia, NGOs, and large companies, and also in terms of finding other like-minded companies. So in the case of electrification, we joined EV100 early, so we were one of the founding members. And when we set the goal of 100% by 2025, we actually had 0%. So we were at zero when we started, and there were lots of discussions. And we wouldn't have dared to make the goal of 2025 if we hadn't really worked a lot with industry experts and believing and actually, I would say, betting on exponential growth and betting on what's right. So a lot of partnerships that we met through EV100 and other coalitions we're part of, but also working together with our suppliers or service providers, because IKEA is not owning their own fleet. We work with service providers, have about 10,000 vehicles with our service providers. So working together with them, which means, first of all, internally, a cross-functional working group where the finance team and the procurement team and sustainability team are critical, because short-term, it is more expensive to go for last-mile delivery. Being electric. So how do we look at the financial models, the business case? How do we find space in our finances to really work with this? Because we know long-term it's correct. So we've set short-term goals. We set 5 cities that should be electric already last year. We achieved that in Shanghai, where in China we have now 90% of our home deliveries being electric. And then we're deploying in most of our markets. So it's really moving from this ambitious goal where we didn't really know how to get there, but we are doubling the amount of zero emission vehicles every year. So daring to set that and then working together and really finding these partners that we can collaborate with to find the solutions.
Great. And I like the term you used, the like-minded business, because, when you don't know, you don't have certainty that everything will work out because it's something very new. It's very, very important to have those partnerships and those like-minded companies that can actually lead to joint problem solving. So having perspectives from the supply side and from the demand side is very, very critical when we come to climate strategies. And yet we also know that apart from these market forces, we need to take a look at the role of governments and public policy in particular. So we have with us a Minister Charette from Quebec, and we are going to hear from him about the most important role of government in your view, because we know that Quebec is doing really innovative work around EVs. What would you like to say about that?
Thank you for the questions. And governments from all around the world, be they national, subnational, or municipal governments, have a crucial role to play in accelerating the pace toward the zero-emission transportation. Many recent studies have confirmed that the carbon footprint of EVs, no matter the electricity mix they use, is much lower than the carbon footprint of gas vehicles. So we must electrify all our means of transportation. As governments, we have many tools available, such as policies, programs, fiscal measures, and others to show the way ahead and to set the pace of this transition towards zero-emission vehicles. The Quebec government has developed its first EV policy in 2011 as a measure to reduce its GHG emissions in the transport sector, which represents almost half of its GHG inventory. And since 99.88% of our electricity is produced with clean and renewable energy, the choice to go all electric was a natural choice for us. We have implemented the ZEV mandate and launched a large number of initiatives across the transport sector to support the purchase of EVs by consumers, cities, institutions, and businesses, and to boost the adoption of charging infrastructures at home and in the workplace. This was done with the help of our carbon markets, since all the revenues from this market are invested in electrifying Quebec's economy. These policies have been very successful, and 10 years later, Quebec is by far the largest EV market in Canada. 45% of EVs are in Quebec, with the largest charging network in the country. Moreover, our EV industrial sector is developing at an exponential rate, creating quality jobs and attracting foreign investments. We have now around 120,000 EVs on the road, and we are aiming for 1.5 million in 2030. And moreover, we are banning the sale of new gas vehicles for 2035. We have also implemented programs and called for tenders to help our road transport industry make the shift to e-mobility and develop a new greener economic sector. today. We manufacture just about every vehicles on and off the roads except for light-duty ones, starting with the urban and school buses like Lyon Electric and Volvo Group Nova Bus, delivery trucks, motorcycle, recreational vehicle like BRP and Taiga Motors, municipal and industrial vehicles also, and even boats. And we also develop charging stations and systems like, for example, Add Energy. Our AV cluster now counts more than 210 members from startups to large companies, and it's creating quality jobs and attracting foreign investment. So it's important that governments show the way, implement ambitious policies, and be the motor for this important transition.
Thank you. And it's impressive. I mean, we know that governments make a difference. And in the case of Quebec, it's also about showing leadership, because having 40% of the market is astonishing. So well done. And we hope to hear more about, specific policy measures that led to that growth. I'd like to switch to Mariam, because we know that finance is the glue that will hold this together. And we don't hear that much about investors. And I would really like to hear Mariam's view about how institutional investors, how the sector is looking at this transition. Is there any surprise, Mariam, that you have noticed in how your sector is viewing this transition?
Sure. So we are obviously invested in every type of company, including a lot of car manufacturers globally. And what we did is back in 2016, just after Paris Agreement, made a very structured engagement on key sectors that are pivotal for this transition, obviously automobile being one of them. So since then, in the last 5 years, we've seen an enormous shift from all the companies that we invested in. As you can imagine, the Europeans were always leading the way, and it was very difficult to engage with the likes of Japanese companies or American companies because the regulations weren't there. To Benoit's point, regulation is just so important in pushing the strategies. But as I said, a huge amount of shift has happened. In fact, one of the companies I'm going to name is Subaru, is a Japanese manufacturer, which really wasn't hitting the minimum target to a point that we had to not only vote against, but divest from some of our funds to sort of say, I'm sorry, this is just not the standard that we expect to see. We're happy to report that this year we've reinstated that. That's to say that even Subaru in Japan has really worked and engaged with us over the years to address some of the concerns and have set targets for zero emission vehicles as well. And so that's kind of one of the examples of how investors can push companies to come up with the right targets. We've also seen in the US the likes of Ford and General Motors committing to phase out petrol and diesel type of cars and set targets for zero emission cars. So all of that is coming thick and fast, which is great. But, obviously financiers have a role to play in making sure that those targets are ambitious and then also push the regulations in the right direction. One thing I do want to say is the power of lobbying from the car manufacturers. So in our assessment criteria, we include how much those car manufacturers are lobbying directly, or most importantly, indirectly through trade associations on regulations. They're quite powerful, as you probably know. And so we actually see that as part of whether there's a consistency between what they're saying and how they're pushing the lobbying. And I think today they recognize that they can't just say one thing on one hand and something else on the other hand. And so there's a little bit more of the reconciliation on the lobbying activity by the car manufacturers, and we have to hold them accountable on that point as well. So there's huge amount that's happened in the last 5 years, but at the same time, a lot more to go, because at the end of the day, they're still waiting for the regulations to come through, and it takes a lot of R&D to shift a business. So we can't just wait for progressive regulations. I think based on the commitments coming out of businesses and governments, we have to start to really prepare for a world where we're not emitting through driving cars and so forth.
Thank you, Mariam. And that point about lobbying is critical. I've been an EV advocate for many years, and I have encountered that often in my work in emerging markets, in Latin America in particular. So thank you for bringing that up. And we are going to now move to the same discussion, of course, but now we're going to go into more specifics about innovations that you want to highlight, or that you want to specify. So, for example, when it comes to innovative solutions and technology and finance, and in particular in policy, what are those innovations that you would like to highlight, Minister Charette, specifically on the role of policies that you have put together in Quebec? Is there something you would like to leave us with? And then I'll go back to Mariam and to Bjorn.
So, as I said earlier, our transport industry is rapidly switching to e-mobility, and we want to make sure that these companies have access to a secure, stable, and circular supply chain, particularly with respect to the EV battery, which we all know is the strategic component of an EV. This is why a few months ago we have adopted a new policy called the Battery Industry Development Strategy to guide us with the development of this new sector of our economy. Our goal to use our assets to build the greenest EV battery for the Quebec and North American market, and to cover the whole value chain of battery production, from the extraction of raw materials to cell manufacturing and even recycling. Among these assets, we have enacted rigorous environmental regulation regarding the extraction of our critical minerals, such as nickel, graphite, lithium, cobalt. We also have manufacturers who are active at every stage of the battery life circle, from the development of battery materials and components like the anode and cathode to the manufacturing of cells and packs. These actors of the battery supply chain are supported by our EV cluster and research institute that regroup more than 450 researchers and own over 850 patents in that field. And as we all know, R&D is key to reducing the cost of the battery pack under $100.
Thank you, Minister. Mariam and Bjorn, what would you like to highlight in terms of innovative solutions that you see in the industry, either from the perspective of financiers and from the perspective of the manufacturers?
Yes, from the finance perspective, to put it short, and it's not quite to your question, but what I want to say is a lot of people wanting to invest in innovation as part of their investments for savings or pensions and so forth. So this huge amount of money, if you like, coming into the space, which is really great. And then I think here where I think we can start to talk about energy transition in the bigger scheme. So instead of just talking about cars, we are thinking about decentralized energy system where we can generate our own energy and use the car as part of the storage and so forth. So I think the relationship that we have with car is just a lot more holistic and plugged into the systems that we invested in, and combined with the fact that a lot of people are a lot more inclined to invest in that, I should think that if you have the right business model, you are likely to attract a lot more investor capital.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I can piggyback off Marianne's points there. I mean, Volvo Cars is right now, we're evaluating a potential IPO. And of course, in such a process, we're talking to a lot of investors. And what I see with investors now, which I think is a bit different to 2-3 years ago, is the level of knowledge of what sustainability means and the level of questions and questionings in order to do this right is at a totally different level. So I think we have a much better, healthy discussion now, investors and companies together. And I think what Mariam talked to, that people greenwash, or you say one thing in lobbying and another thing in your marketing, that game can't be played any longer. You need to play one game. And I think for Volvo, I just want to be clear, we end internal combustion 2030, all countries, all cars, no caveats. And we say the same thing to everybody, regulators, lobbying organizations, and in our marketing. And I think that more and more companies are going that way, and I think that's good for the world.
Yeah, it is. It is good for the world. And now we know that there are many positive stories, and we know that your companies and Quebec is a has this can-do attitude. And yet we know that there are barriers, and we know that there are obstacles there that we have to talk about. So, Pia, what would you like to highlight when it comes to thinking about a barrier that really needs to overcome if we want to go faster?
I think we've been onto it. I mean, it is continuing to dare to collaborate, find the kind of least common denominator, so we can find what we can collaborate on. I mean, there is still, if I take from a deployment perspective, I mean, charging infrastructure is very different, not only between countries, within countries. So keep pushing that, creating the preconditions. The way we calculate and the way we look at business cases, I mean, for our service providers to take the upfront cost of a more expensive electric car is not an easy choice. So looking at the lifetime use and the lifetime cost of a vehicle. And then I think the continued discussion and sharing of good examples, and also getting it across to the end consumers, because there's a lot of concerns that because of the precious metals and the batteries and the life length, this is not a great solution. So I've just recently heard it with friends that is there a risk that we jump into a new solution that also has problems? So we go from one ditch to another, or from something bad to something else bad. And my approach is more the learnings we've done from investing in renewable energy, wind farms since 2009. The wind turbines that we see today on the market are way better than the ones 10, 12 years ago, but they wouldn't have been better if we hadn't started to invest. And I'm not saying IKEA per se, but in general. So we need to invest and send a direction of new innovations and new solutions to get to the tipping point and really start to discuss about stranded assets and getting everyone behind it and make decisions and dare to bet on the new, because we know that what we have today is not going to get us to a net zero economy.
Precisely. And we need to address those issues of, say, batteries or renewable electricity. And yet we have to win the argument for the electrification and acceleration in the next 5 years. So I'm very keen to hear from Bjorn about that challenge or that obstacle that you see from the perspective of Volvo Cars.
No, I think there are fundamentally three problems for the consumer. Battery electric vehicles are still a bit more expensive. They don't trust the fast charging infrastructure, and then it always takes time to change consumer behaviors. And that's really the challenge now, to quickly address all these problems. And we view that Volvo Cars, we will reach cost parities on fully battery electric cars with ICE cars today by mid-decade, so 4 or 5 years from now. So that cost problem will go away with the right investment in the right technology. And we also see fast charging infrastructure is quickly growing up, sometimes really supported by strong governments who see the needs of this, who kind of get it started. But you also see a lot of private investments going into it. So that problem will be solved in the coming few years. And then you need to give consumers great choice of products. And that's where we're investing all our money now to provide good full electric cars. So you see the growth in this sector. It's not in the 10% double digit, it's triple digit growth. And as a company, you want to be in the growing part of the market. So you quickly see great investment and great innovation focus being put into this sector. So I think the train has left the station, and now let's see who win on the journey.
Great. And we know this is going to be difficult because we don't have a lot of time, and we would like to say something very concrete about the obstacles from the policy perspective, and then jump into COP26, because we know we have a very concrete opportunity this year to create a ZEV moment when governments come to Glasgow. So, Minister, would you like to highlight a key barrier that you have faced in Quebec?
So in terms of challenges, the COVID-19 pandemic has taught us many lessons. For governments, one of these lessons has been to reiterate the importance of securing the production and the supplies of goods in strategic sectors of their economy. And as we have seen recently with the semiconductors, key strategic components can create a great deal of problems along supply chains in their production if their production is not controlled. With regards to EVs, battery production is the one main missing link in North America. So from this point of view, the biggest challenge to accelerate the uptake of EVs is for North America for the different jurisdictions to work together and catch up to speed with Europe and Asia on the production of EV batteries to make sure that our EV industry has access to locally made quality batteries. And this task will need a great deal of collaboration between all the jurisdictions and the industry. And thankfully, this issue has been identified as a priority both in Canada and in the US. So Quebec wants to be a partner in the development of this new North American industry and ensure that EVs built in North America, be they light duty cars, SUVs, trucks, or buses, have the lightest carbon footprint. So this is in line with Quebec's objective to be carbon neutral in 2050, which includes, of course, the decarbonization of its own industry.
Thank you. And we know that COP is going to have for the first time a space for ZEVs. So Miriam and Pia, what should we expect from business by the time Glasgow comes?
I think what we're expecting is a lot of ambitions and a lot of commitments, which is great because we have to be in the same tent going towards the same direction of not only net zero by 2050, but meaningful targets to 2025, 2030. The key important thing after COP is the how. We have to move the money, we have to move the R&D, we have to move the strategy. So I think when all the commitments meet after COP, then we can get on with the problem and the challenge of meeting the actual transition challenge.
And I can just build on that. And yes, commitments, but I'm hoping also to have some clear discussions on how to take away the barriers, because I think we had a lot of commitments already at last COP meeting, and we need to really move into deployment and really share what works, what doesn't work, and how can we take away barriers to move even faster. So I would say if commitments up to COP, then very quickly thereafter to sit down and really discuss the hows and take away the barriers.
Thank you. Let's hope that is what we get out of the COP on ZEVs. And now we're going to wrap up, and I will give you 1 minute, less than 1 minute to each, because we have to finish this, we have to wrap up. And would you like to leave the audience with a one sentence message that you want to share with us about this transition? I'm going to start again with Miriam.
I'd say there's a lot of things that we can all do individually, the way we maybe rent cars, the way we use shared cars, or the way we buy cars and things. And let's put that into the conversation, because it's possible now. Technology is here and we can all be part of that.
Great. Minister, what's your one sentence message?
Well, we have to work all together, all the governments. I think you have said it. Yes, we need the full collaboration of the industry. And I think when we hear what we are hearing this morning, we have to be optimistic, but we need a clear political leadership also. Yes, Quebec in Canada is probably the loudest voice on this issue, but I think we hear more and more other jurisdictions, states and provinces that are interested to be part of this change, but we do need a strong political will if we want these changes happen. And it's, well, with the COP, we just don't have any other choice. So thank you for these companies that are represented this morning on this panel. They are clearly the voice that we need to hear louder and louder. So thank you.
Thank you. Now, Pia, what would you like to leave us with?
I would say bet on the future. We need to move fast and don't underestimate the challenges, but it also don't underestimate the opportunities, because like Björn was saying, this is the train has left the station and it's better to be on it than be looking at it. And also don't underestimate from a company perspective the energy you get in the organization when you feel like you're working on something that's not only financially the right thing to do, maybe mid to long term, but also the ethically and morally right thing to do. So you build so much energy in the company by moving on with this quickly and rather than waiting for it to happen.
Thank you. Björn, last but not least.
I try to be short. I would summarize it as clean business is great business. And yes, the direction for 2040 is clear. Now it's about the next 5 years. Let's get concrete now, here and now.
Thank you. And I'll reinforce that the next 5 years is where we need to get to the tipping point. So it's going to be fantastic amount of energy for all of us. There is a lot of work to do. As you have heard from this panel, there are barriers, but there is also a lot of ambition, a lot of drive. So we are very motivated after this panel. I hope you are too. And now back to you, Sandra.
Thanks so much, Monica. And it's been really great, especially at the end, to hear those final messages of ambition, but also of optimism. So now I'd like to hand back to Helen, who will be leading a conversation on the role of the US federal government in delivering a just and equitable transition to zero-emission vehicles. Over to you, Helen.
I'm delighted to be here with two senior officials from the Biden administration who both have huge influence on how the US federal government will implement the transition to zero-emission vehicles. We have with us Robin Carnahan, Administrator of the US General Services Administration, responsible for real estate, procurement, technology, and a number of other areas of spending for the federal government. And Brenda Mallory, Chair of the Council of Environmental Quality, the key advisor to President Biden on matters relating to the environment and natural resources, who's taken a particular focus on environmental justice, climate change, and creating opportunities for clean economic growth and good jobs. Earlier this year, we saw a number of pledges from the US government on electric vehicles, including building a national network of 500,000 charging stations across the country, and to transition the 650,000 vehicles in the federal fleet to zero-emission technologies, which will also include installing EV charging infrastructure at federal facilitators. So let's start with Administrator Carnahan. What's the role for government in leading by example in the transition to zero-emission vehicles, and how can you harness the power of public procurement to drive markets forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, as you mentioned, GSA manages one of the biggest fleets in the country. It's a significant portion of the federal fleet. All non-tactical vehicles, even those of the Defense Department, are bought through GSA. That ends up being about 50,000 cars a year. And then we also manage a fleet of over 200,000 vehicles. So there's a lot we can do. I will tell you that already 35 different agencies have zero-emission vehicles in their fleets, which is terrific. They've driven 39 million miles already. That's, if you map that out, it's 13,000 megawatts of power that has been able to be cheaper and cleaner for the environment and for taxpayers. So we're working really closely with agencies about their needs and also with manufacturers to, understand how we can best leverage the buying power of the government to do this.
Great. And Chair Mallory, the Biden administration has made it clear that any transport electrification actions need to be centred on equity, environmental justice, and creating good quality jobs. What does that look like in practice?
I think in practice, what it means is that these issues are front and center in the policy discussions. I think it's important to sort of be clear on what we mean when we say center these things in our actions. Number one, centering equity means being very intentional in the policy development to ensure that low-income communities and communities of color receive the benefits of these programs. Number two, striving for environmental justice means working to ensure that environmental harms associated with developing and deploying this technology does not result in disproportionate impacts, adverse impacts to low-income communities and communities of color. And then number three, creating good quality jobs means fostering opportunities where folks can not only make a livable wage, but can build careers and support communities for the future we need. So here are kind of a few examples. We know that for low-income communities and communities of color, being able to charge your vehicle in a private garage is generally not an option. So in the federal fleet context, where there's potential to share charging infrastructure with the public, meeting the needs of environmental justice communities will be a central consideration in the location of this infrastructure. In general, considering practical solutions to address these situations is important in both the broad deployment of electric vehicles and ensuring environmental justice. And then turning to jobs, creating good quality jobs is a goal that is very much served by leveraging the purchasing power of the government to promote the growth of the domestic zero emissions vehicle industry, as Administrator Carnahan just discussed. But there is just a great potential for this industry to support good paying union jobs, not just through vehicle manufacturing, but in the charging station manufacturing and installation and in the ongoing maintenance for both the vehicles and the stations. But even with these benefits, making sure that these manufacturing facilities do not perpetuate practices that harm communities is important to ensuring environmental justice. So, as I said, it's across the board. We're thinking through these issues at every stage.
Yeah, and this is an area that's moving so fast at the moment, but what's stopping it going even faster? What are the barriers that are holding back progress and what needs to be done to overcome them, and how quickly can we do that? Administrator Carnahan, let's start with you.
Well, I mean, it's really exciting that the private sector we've all seen is already moving in this direction. We've seen lots of announcements by manufacturers about their move toward zero emission vehicles. So that's terrific to be able to be part of this bigger movement. But the transition of the federal fleet and all of these vehicles, we know is going to take time. It's going to take more vehicle options to be able to meet all of the mission needs that different agencies have. And Brenda mentioned it, like charging infrastructure is a very big deal. In order for this to work, we've got to have the charging infrastructure where the vehicles are located. So we're going to be working really closely with manufacturers of that infrastructure and folks at the White House and Brenda's team at CEQ to move quickly and do this in very intentional ways that meet the needs of folks. So it's a neat opportunity. But I will tell you, it's going to obviously take investment, but it's good for jobs, it's good for the economy, and it's certainly good for the environment. So we're all in.
Great. Chair Mallory, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, let me just pick up on the infrastructure point again, because I think that is a key limiting factor in what we're able to do. And the administration is really pushing to prioritize this area. We can't roll out zero emission vehicles without having the charging stations in the ground ready to provide power to the vehicles. And so we are asking agencies, especially in these initial years of the effort, to focus on charging station infrastructure. In all cases, this means facilities and fleet personnel need to lock arms in a way that they have never had to do before. And it means agencies will have to work closely with electric utilities to ensure we are thinking and acting now to prepare ourselves for the full-scale fleet electrification we're rapidly kind of ramping up to. But promoting this cultural change and working to get charging stations on the ground as soon as possible is something CEQ, in partnership with GSA and DOE, is working very actively on. And whether that's through kind of planning tools we've given to the agencies or additional kind of forthcoming resources and guidance, I think this is going to be a very important part of our working together on this issue.
Great. And I've got time for a very quick last question. So kind of in one sentence, what's the thing that most excites you about your work on zero emission vehicles? Administrator Carnahan.
Look, it's very unusual to have in government money and momentum aligned at the same time. and around this big transformative idea. And we have that now. We've been working on it for years. Now is the moment to get this done. We've got the federal government's on board, the Biden administration, Congress is on board, state and local governments are on board, the private sector's on board. Like, this is the time to make this happen. And I'm excited about that.
Great. Chair Mallory.
I'm excited as well. And I think that our success in the transition to zero emissions vehicles is not only a key to tackling climate change, but we will deliver cleaner air in thousands of communities where federal fleets operate. And that is just a very exciting result.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much. And thanks for all your hard work on this area and for joining us here at Climate Week NYC.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
So now, before we dive into our next session, which continues on the theme of ensuring a just transition through clean road transport, I'm very pleased to be able to turn to one of their close colleagues in the Biden administration for his perspective on this important issue. I'd like to introduce the Administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, Michael Regan, for the panel's opening remarks.
Hello, everyone. I'm excited to help kick off such an important Climate Week discussion. I want to thank you for your commitment to driving forward a clean transportation future. The climate crisis demands aggressive action. President Biden has put forth the most ambitious climate agenda in our nation's history. A critical part of meeting our climate goal is encouraging quicker adoption of zero-emission vehicles. That's why the President recently laid out an aggressive goal to achieve 50% electric vehicle sales in 2030. To help achieve these goals, EPA recently proposed stringent national standards to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from passenger cars and light trucks. These standards will accelerate the innovation we're seeing in this sector and secure pollution reductions to help fight the climate crisis. Separately, EPA took a major step forward, restoring California's authority to adopt its own strong pollution standards and zero-emission mandates for new vehicles. But cleaner cars aren't our only focus. To address the long-standing burden of air pollution in overburdened communities, we also announced plans to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and other harmful air pollutants from new heavy-duty trucks. From the delivery trucks you see around neighborhoods to 18-wheelers on our highways. We're just getting started, but we're laser-focused on building a clean energy future and capturing the benefits that come with it. Cleaner air for our kids to breathe, healthier communities, and good-paying union jobs in every community across America. I hope you have a productive panel and a great Climate Week.
Thank you, Administrator Regan, for leading us so well onto our final panel, How Zero-Emission Vehicles Can Drive a Just Transition. Over to our moderator, Angela Hultberg.
Thank you, Helen. Welcome to everyone joining us for this final panel discussion on how zero-emission vehicles can drive a just transition, where we'll be looking at the opportunities and the challenges that this shift presents. I'm Angela Hultberg. I'm Transport Lead at the UN Climate Champions, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome our panelists today. We have Sharon Burrow, General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation, Nicholas Estupinian, Secretary of Mobility at the Mayor's Office of Bogota, and Theodor Svedjamark, Chief Communication and Sustainability Officer at ABB. So now that we have the most difficult part, promoting everyone's names right, we are going to dive right into the questions. Sharon, when it comes to the term just transition, this is something we're increasingly hearing in relation to moving to a zero carbon economy. What does it mean for you, and how does it apply to zero emission vehicles?
So we're in a race against time. Everybody accepts that. If we don't do more than half of the journey towards zero emissions by 2030, then we won't stabilize the planet. Zero emissions vehicles are clearly part of that. However, you know, as everybody does, that if you take the combustion engine and you take an electric engine, then there's less than half of the numbers of moving parts. So just in manufacturing and production alone, we will see jobs lost in this environment. That's without looking at other areas of technological change. So what we say is just transition is a very simple concept. Every sector must transition. We must do it rapidly. That requires trust. And for working people, they need a seat at the table where they can help design the guarantees that will give them security for retirement incomes, security if it's an early bridge to pensions, or if it's indeed income support for skilling and indeed redeployment support to transition to other jobs, good jobs. They must be good jobs to build trust. And of course, investment in communities so we don't leave stranded people or stranded communities in the process.
Absolutely. And Nicholas, Bogota is considered a leader in e-mobility in the region. So can you tell us a bit about the most important policy that is driving change and maybe a key lesson you'd like to share with other cities?
Angela, thank you very much. Well, I think we have been trying to work on both the short term, the medium term, and the long term here in Bogota. For example, for the long term, one of the most important policies that we are having here is that we are changing the whole matrix of transportation. We're adding into this long-term land use planning and master plan for transportation, the matrix of the fuel that we're going to be using. So we're adding approximately 90 kilometers of underground transportation, right, by metro, and we're adding up 110 kilometers of commuting trains. So that's a major change. In the short term, we're basically adding more money and more budget to financing all the electrification of the transportation of Transmilenio, our bus system. And now we're having almost 1,500 electric buses that are already contracted and are already running. So outside of China, Bogota and Santiago de Chile are one of the most electrified fleets in the world. So we're putting our money where our mouth is by putting more money to electrify Transmilenio. And in the long term, we're changing the matrix under which the Bogota transportation system is going to run.
That's amazing, very inspiring. And speaking then of leaders, Theodore, as an EV100 member, ABB is also leading by example. I know you're transitioning your 10,000 strong fleet to electric vehicles. I know you're installing a significant amount of chargers across the world. So can you tell us a bit about the key drivers behind this decision?
Well, of course, thank you, Angela. And first, I'm very pleased to be able to participate in this very important discussion. So a warm thank you for inviting ABB and myself to participate. As a global technology company, sustainability is really at the center of our company purpose, and it has been for a very long time. And we see it really as part of the value that we provide not only to our customers, but suppliers, society as a whole. And we have a very long history in driving sustainable progress. And last year, we launched our new 2030 sustainability agenda. And in this, there is a very important part where we have committed ourselves that in the year 2030, through our technology, we will help reduce our customers' emissions by more than 100 megaton per year. And here, e-mobility comes in. As you mentioned, we are one of the world leaders in providing electrical vehicle charging infrastructure. And today, we have more than 400,000 fast chargers installed around the world in actually more than 85 countries. And as well, to lead them by example, but of course, to have the same similar level of impact, we also want to become carbon neutral within our own operations by 2030, where transitioning our own fleet, you mentioned 10,000 vehicles, to non-emitting or electric vehicles by 2030, and thereby the EV100 pledge is a very important one. But we will also source 100% of our power from the renewables and deploy energy management systems at our sites. So we're also very proud RE100 and EP100 members.
That's fantastic. Talk about, again, putting the money where your mouth is. I think it's absolutely amazing. So I think this is a great place to move into our wider discussion. And let's see if we can actually get a bit of discussion going, even though we're in 4 completely different places. Let's see if we can do it. So let's start with talking about what role can zero-emission vehicles play to help governments achieve their environmental targets and public health goal. And Nicholas, I'm gonna start with you. What are your thoughts on the role of zero-emission vehicles to help reach these targets?
For us here in Bogota, it's absolutely critical. I want to share with you an experience that we had. At the end of last year and at the beginning of this year, we were discussing with the city council how to promote a law that would require that any public vehicle that Bogota would buy from 2022 on for the transportation system should be an electric vehicle, zero-emission vehicle. And the debate, both in the city council and with the technical side of the different teams, was if the pricing is sufficient to have the less impact possible on the fiscal side of the city, right? Because of pandemia, Bogota, as many other cities in the world, is having and is struggling with this economic crisis. So the fiscal impact that the pandemia had in Bogota and in the system and in the transportation system was putting in jeopardy, was putting in danger the discussion that we were having with the city council. So the vehicles are here, the commitment, the political commitment is of course always here, and the mayor told us, Mayor Claudia Lopez told us, we have to go, we have to comply with our expectations. In Bogota, in a year before pandemia, we had almost 2,000 people that were dead because of respiratory diseases. So here is a major thing. And basically what we did was, okay, so we're gonna commit to that goal. And we, with the city council, we passed that law that requires that any vehicle that is bought in Bogota after 2022, it has to be an electric vehicle for the public transportation system. So the vehicles are definitely complying with a major part into this commitment that we have. And now we need to focus a little bit more, at least here, in the pricing.
Great. And you mentioned now the vehicles are here, the commitments are here. Sharon, in the middle of that, though, we have the many people, right? What are your thoughts on the role of the vehicles to help achieve wider goals for governments?
Well, the good news is if you take the 21 emerging markets and you spend 2.7 trillion, which is what it will take if we're going to transform urban transport, then this can create around 53 million jobs. If they're good jobs, for every job, there's then a manufacturing job dividend, a logistics job dividend, and indeed jobs in the broader economy by a multiplier of up to 3. So when you think about that, that's worth having, apart from the climate dividend. When you look at per dollar invested, you will get more jobs in public transport than you'll get, indeed 3 times as many jobs as you'll get in building new highways. And of course, electric transport, as you just heard, not only improves pollution so that the health impact for people is significant, but it also encourages opportunities, particularly when it's mapped with smart urban planning and the distribution of urban transport that allows for people, who are aged or disabled to be, in fact, included in a public transport system through the kind of digitalisation, mapping and supply and demand. So there's lots to be said. The real question is, can we marry these across the sectors? If you think we just produced the first 200 tonnes of green steel in Sweden, my own deputy president is an advisor to SSAB. If you look at other areas of advancement in manufacturing and the circular economy, can we marry energy, transport, and indeed manufacturing with all the attendant services and the multiplier of spin-off in development and jobs? And if we can get that right, then it's not just about climate, although that's imperative. It's also about a just transition that gives people hope.
So Theodore, coming from a business perspective, would it even be possible not to marry energy, transport and manufacturing, as Sharon is saying? What are your views from the corporate world on this?
Well, I mean, if you start with a little bit going back to the problem also, I mean, transport is responsible for about a third of global greenhouse gas emissions today, and road transport is accounting for up to 75% of that. And I think in cities, particularly pollution from these vehicles is becoming really a major public health hazard. So of course, as you said, we are a technology company, a manufacturer. Of course, to enable this transition is extremely important. But first, a recent study that I read, I think it was from the University of Chicago, say that up to 40% of the people in India, which is more than 1 billion people, actually face a reduced life expectancy as a result of air pollution, out of which a large part are stemming from the vehicles that they have today. So with electric vehicles, emissions and urban pollution can be dramatically reduced and really improve both the wider environmental and public health goals of the company. But to achieve this, we really want to try to drive also excitement, or in order to, what my colleagues here mentioned, you know, we need the infrastructure, we need the policies in place, but we need also to create the excitement with people, which is one of the reasons that also ABB chose a few years ago to become the title partner of ABB Formula E, where we bring electric racing into the cities around the world to bring people, the families onto the track and have a chance to see and experience what racing to the future is all about.
And I think this is so important coming from all three of you, that transitioning to zero-emission mobility in cities is part of the just transition, because we all have a right to breathe air that is not toxic. So does anyone. Absolutely crucial. And so what do you then think about the challenges for industry and employment specifically, and how can we overcome them? Starting with you, Sharon.
So employment plans must become part of transition plans for climate. It's that simple. We have a very good partnership with the C40 group of cities and our International Transport Federation around mobility. We also know that we have to do more to integrate those advances across all sectors that are relevant in industrial transitions. But cities, indeed, are part of the solution. You heard, indeed, the figures for transport. But if you take cities and the capacity for green, livable cities, where you have good jobs, quality jobs, then you can do 40% of the job. You can also catalyse demand and supply, because if the bulk of people live in our cities, then the demand curve is obvious. And with government procurement, and a look at the way we invest in cities and just transition, you can also indeed motivate a shift in the supply curve. So this is good news if people work together, if we understand we are in a race, but that people and planet have to be at the centre and not just profit.
Absolutely. And Theodore, what are your thoughts? ABB being a large employer and an industry in the middle of all this, what challenges do you see, and what's your plans to overcome them?
Sure. I mean, maybe to start with, EVs definitely have less parts, and they require, generally speaking, less maintenance over the life cycle of the vehicle, which could lead, of course, to fewer jobs in the direct automotive manufacturing sector, as an example. But on the plus side, e-mobility is also creating entirely new industries, companies, and I'll mention just a couple of examples. I mean, in our own, I mentioned we are a global leader in EV charging technology. Over the last 10 years, that business has grown with an annual compounded growth rate of almost 50%, and versus last year, it's more than 100% up. And today we have from a startup, a company that employs more than 800 people, including 250 engineers, who really help drive this transition from a technology development perspective. And I mean, in other parts of the company, we work also with many of our automotive OEMs, and we really see how this shift is helping to drive also a shift in their approach to manufacturing. And they, generally speaking, probably could draw the conclusion they require today more skilled workers. with more digital competence, with more electrical know-how, definitely in comparison to old technology. So we see a shift, and I think it's important that we engage and we work with both our customers, suppliers, but also society and the public to bring this forward in a joint way. So governments, business, and civil society really have to get together to retrain, reskill, and invest in this future. And we do this, I don't know for those of you who don't know, but Switzerland, for example, has a very long tradition in apprenticeship and let's call it theoretical education-based systems. So we are helping to take this concept, for example, to Arkansas in Fort Smith. We have implemented, together with the local government, a reskilling training program based also on the Swiss apprenticeship model, and we also many other countries around the world. And we think this is extremely important.
So we all have a responsibility when it comes to retrain and reskill. It's not only talking about we're going to have more jobs, we need to also help people acquire the right skill set for that. I think that's great. We heard Sharon talking about the importance of cities, and of course I want to get to you, Niklas, well, you're not a city, but representing a city. So what are your thoughts on this problem set?
It's very interesting for me to hear the numbers and the figures, the challenges that Sharon and Theodore present. I think, and I believe that here in Bogota, we have been approaching in a proper manner both public transportation and taxis. But I'm hearing a lot of opportunities, of course, for the freight and the cargo sector, which, as you know, is, of course, a very important contributor into local emissions. Employment opportunities, retraining and rescaling, I think, are crucial. And we have been doing some good efforts trying to bring together the private sector, these local companies that can help in the urban distribution of freight. We have been working with them, trying to implement some pilots with help of C40, with help of the World Bank, for cargo bikes, for example, right? So we have some protected areas where big vehicles cannot come in. So we're trying to pilot test urban distribution with cargo bikes. And this, of course, is an early beginner of these practices here in Latin America, and we're having a lot of challenges. But I think this ability to create and to develop new employment is also going to be crucial in this economic recovery from the pandemic. So we can bring together those two problems, the economic crisis that we have, and of course the global emissions problem. Then we're going to have new important chances of having better employments that, of course, can also help us fight climate change.
Yeah, and I think that is one of the conclusions to draw, really, that we cannot fight one without another. If we want to solve financial crises, we need to consider the environment and vice versa. But so sometimes, and I want to bring this up, even though it might be slightly uncomfortable, so sometimes when we talk about zero-emission vehicles and EV sales and all of that, it tends to be a little bit focused on a certain group of people and certain geographies, right? And it's obviously extremely important to make sure that the transition to zero-emission vehicles and to have these clean, healthy cities that we've been talking about is accessible and affordable and equitable for everyone and not just the selected few. So turning to you first, Theodore, how do we ensure that the transition is really for everyone?
Well, for us, it starts, and I mentioned it already before, and the colleagues here also on the call said it, but we really need to work together to drive policies and initiatives to encourage the take-up of electric vehicles as a basis. And the transition will have big implications. One of them is, for example, today, the basis for the electric vehicle or the battery electric vehicle is the battery, which is changing also the whole supply chain and things like that, which has very important implications. Where we are mining historically is an industry where safety has been very high on the agenda, but it hasn't yet transitioned fully also to electric. We are putting a lot of effort on that. We actually launched last week with a big pomp and circumstance some new solutions in and around completely electrifying the transport within a mine, to also help make this part of the value chain more fair and also reduce the emissions in that. But I think, again, we need really the policy, the initiatives to help drive public transport, make charging infrastructure available where it is needed, when it is needed. So, for example, AC chargers or slower chargers in all new buildings should be mandatory, in my personal opinion, in all homes retrofitted. And the government here needs to come in and really help push in collaboration with industry and other stakeholder groups that this happens on an affordable basis. And I think we've seen that in many places around the world. China, for example, is a country which is very strongly pushing in the EV space. They have lots of OEM manufacturers of new vehicles, but they've also taken drastic steps in making sure that the infrastructure is available. But we also need, if you go over to Europe, take the German Autobahn, which is very famous, we need to make sure that public charging, fast charging infrastructure is available along motorways, etc., in rural areas. And also here, we see some pretty encouraging developments from Brussels, etc. And of course, last but not least, in the US, where the current presidential administration has made big commitments in terms of investing in electric vehicle infrastructure. But again, I said it already before, for us it's really important that we get the people with us when we need to make EVs fun. It needs to be something attractive, and it needs to be something that people want to do. And again, that's why we have engaged, one of the reasons why we have engaged in the ABB Formula E title partnership, to bring and show how great, how fun, and how cool it can be to race to the future.
So a bit of change management coming there for the people. Nicholas, you have been talking a lot about the role of public transportation in ensuring everyone has access to affordable and sustainable mobility. What else are you looking at to ensure that this transition will benefit all?
As you mentioned, Angela, of course, public transportation here that accounts for more than half of the trips in Bogota is one of our main focuses. But then again, we have been also working a lot with freight and with cargo. We have a very serious problem here with both global and local emissions. And the thing here is that we have a very dispersed cargo and freight sector. We have a very atomized fleet. So we have one vehicle per one person, per one owner. And for those people, pricing is still a barrier, right? They don't have access to credit. They do not make part of a bigger company that can have a lot of financing schemes. So we're having this very big challenge where we're facing about 10,000 people, 15,000 people that own a small vehicle that is a very polluting vehicle, and that person cannot be thinking in the long term or in the life cycle of the new vehicle he's going to buy, because he has no access or she has no access to credit. So we're facing that problem, and we're structuring a fund with the national and with the local government and with development banks so that we can leverage additional resources so that we can help a little bit with the pricing. So still for us, at least at the local level, pricing is still one of the major challenges into removing these barriers to access to more and more renewal of these fleets. So public transportation, we're doing okay. We're also doing okay with taxis. We're having these different pilots where we're increasingly seeing interest, as Theodore mentioned, as companies are getting more excited about this transitioning. But with freight and with cargo at the local scale, we're still having a lot of problems.
Great. Okay, thank you. And I think when it comes to freight, especially e-commerce, we can do a whole different segment on that. That would be a panel in its own right. Sharon, then rounding up with you. Yeah, in many parts of the world, one's vehicle is one's livelihood, as Nicholas pointed out. What are your thoughts on making sure the transition is really for everyone?
Well, I think going to your challenge about inclusion, because we cannot just have this shift in the wealthier parts of the world. Now, Bogota is a good example of an emerging market, but even there, it's a middle-income country. And we need to move to ensure that the shared technology and investment is everywhere. Because, you know, from the supply chains forward, you can't go forward with, new and improved electric vehicles without batteries that are not mined by child or forced labour. You can't actually go forward if, in fact, all we're doing is changing the cities of the wealthy. So this is an act of both self-interest for corporations, but a genuine act of solidarity and commitment to determined inclusive action for the planet. Everybody must have access to clean and indeed affordable transport. It will be a mix, you've heard that. There'll be individual vehicles, there'll be shared vehicles, there'll be different models of financing. But in the end, if we could get it right in cities all around the world, and we could then spin off the solidarity of investing in the supply chains with decent work everywhere, we would be making a huge difference both to recovery and to resilience, but indeed to the climate race as well. So just transition, inclusion of people, shared technology, and a different approach to the way we see finance and investment, absolutely fundamental, with decent work as a foundation.
Absolutely. I have to say it's inspiring just to listen to. I feel like we should print it, frame it, and put it in offices in all governments everywhere. My final question here, and I will challenge you now to keep this not only short, but preferably to one sentence if you can. What is the message you'd like to leave us with today, thinking about achieving clean road transport for everyone? What is the one thing we should all remember when we leave this session? Nicholas, I'm going to start with you.
Transportation is just a mechanism to create more equitable cities, more just cities, and to ensure clean transportation for everyone is the single most important commitment that we have here in cities.
Fantastic. Very to the point. Thank you. Sharon, what would you like to leave us with?
So transport is critical for access, for mobility, for connectedness, and of course for the economy, whether it's cities or in the supply chains. But if it's not clean and sustainable transport with good jobs that people actually can trust, then we won't have the hope to meet the race against time for climate, or indeed secure the just transition that is the foundation of that hope.
Absolutely. And Theodore, final word to you then.
Thank you, Angela. Well, as a global leader in electrification and EV fast charging, we are convinced that a low-carbon e-mobility economy can and will create both well-paying jobs, help drive and spur innovation, but also mitigate the costs of climate change.
What a note to end on. I want to thank you all panelists for a fantastic discussion. There's lots of work to do in front of us, both short and medium and long term for sure. But from what we've heard today, there is also an ambition and a sincere will to have it done. So thank you for that. And thank you to everyone viewing. I'd now like to hand over to Sandra for this event's closing remarks. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Angela, and thanks to all of our speakers and moderators for sharing some really great insights today and some really powerful contributions. It's been particularly encouraging for me to hear about the work that's happening all across the segments of the market, from electric two-wheelers to electric trucks. So really so much happening across the transport space and across all stakeholders. And just as we've been discussing right now, national governments have also been meeting as part of the ZEV Transition Council to focus on policies needed to support faster deployment and uptake of electric vehicles at national level. So we'll be looking forward to seeing the outcomes of those meetings and to see increased political will and action at COP26 and beyond. Thanks especially to everyone who has tuned into Climate Week NYC today. I hope you'll be able to make the most of the week. Thank you.